from John 11, verses 28 through 36, and I will be reading from the New Revised Standard Version, Updated Edition. And it begins, we hear Martha speaking. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So we are still getting to know one another. So I'm going to share some stories this morning that, quite honestly, in preparing the message for this morning, if you're going to preach for the pastor who's having surgery on his shoulder, you don't typically want to pull the grief card, but I did, so here we are. But as I've been praying and discerning through what these words are supposed to be this morning, God said, "There's some stories I want you to tell." And I said, "I don't want to." And God said, "Too bad." So I'm going to share some pieces about my life with you today. And I do that because even though I have only been here for a couple of months, I feel very deeply connected to you and your story and the lives that God has brought together within this specific community. I was a choir nerd. Any other choir nerds out there? Okay, great. They were my friend group from elementary school to high school. We just all kind of landed in the same space together, and we did life together in ways that were super goofy. We avoided homecoming together because we didn't want to do that, and would have so many movie nights over at my friend Carrie's house. And there even became a time in high school that we would all just fall asleep during the movie night, and nobody would go home. And then my parents found out that boys were staying there too, and it got a little dicey. It was not like that in our friend group at all, but we had this deep community and love for each other. When we went away to college, I went 3 hours away to Drake in Des Moines, Iowa, and everybody else kind of stayed around here, most to Missouri schools, and they would come home more on the weekends to Kansas City than I would. But I also had found a new community of people at college. Being 3 hours away, it meant that something new was happening in my life. By the power of the Holy Spirit, that group of friends had grown up in church. I did not grow up in church. I went to church on Christmas and Easter with my grandparents. Did not always like it. Made me a lot uncomfortable, actually. And so that was really my only experience until I found myself in this community of people that actually believed the things that Jesus said and wanted to live those things out. That community of friends had me attending churches with them, Bible study with them. I had a super awkward moment with my roommate at one point when she said, "We're all going church hopping." And I said, "What is that?" And she said, "It's where you go find a church when you're not at your home church, you need to find a church up here. And I was like, what's a home church? And she said, the church you grew up in. And I said, no, that's not how that went. And all of a sudden, she looked at me like I'd sprouted 5 heads and was like, you didn't grow up in church? And I was like, yeah, no, not at all. Which then had a completely different relationship with my roommate that was me focused more on asking questions about why she did things and her being more explaining a lot more instead of just assuming that I knew the things that were happening there. One afternoon, I'm in my dorm room and I get a phone call. My roommate was not there at the time, at the first phone call, and this phone call was from one of my high school friends, Carrie. And she said, Adam's been in a car wreck. I'm on my way to the hospital. And I said, okay, keep me updated. What's happening? I think that there was panic for me immediately because I was not there. And I knew I wouldn't be able to get there. I was 3 hours away. I wasn't the 20 minutes away that Carrie was. This was also before cell phones. We were dependent on landlines, which meant Carrie did not have a phone on her, and I could not just call her and get an answer to anything that I was panicking about. After several hours, she hadn't called back, and I got desperate. So I started calling the hospitals around the area. Found out he was at Liberty Hospital. Then started asking for information, and they wouldn't tell me anything. So then I got them to connect me to the surgical waiting room, where I first asked for Carrie. She was not there. I asked for Adam's mom. She was not there. And the person on the other side of the phone must have heard the desperation in my voice to know what had happened to my friend. And their response was, I'm so sorry that I have to be the one to tell you this, that Adam did not survive. I remember leaning against the door jamb, corded phone in my hand dropping to the floor, and just sinking all the way down with water streaming from my eyeballs. And I must have made some sort of loud exclamation or something because my RA came running. What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And I could not get words out at all. Everything that kept screaming out in my head was paired with everything I was learning about God. And so it turned into this moment of questioning of why would God let Adam die? Why would God let something like this happen? And now I know that that was really bad theology. But it took a lot of years for me to figure out that God does not actually sit around plotting bad things for us to happen. That is not what God is in the business of. God is love. God is goodness. God is healing and health. And the opposite of that is not of God. There is unfortunately evil and darkness in this world. And it sometimes takes over. Those forces work against us every time. And when Adam died, I went into a very serious season of depression. After a few months, I remember riding in a car with my dad, and I don't have any idea what I had said or what I had done, but his reply was, "It's been long enough, you need to get over this." 10 out of 10 would not recommend ever saying that, because his words did not take into account anything, actually. Grief is a natural part of being human. No one should tell anyone else how to grieve. This is also a moment to remind you that words can hurt, and be careful what you say. And if you do say something that is not okay, humility is also okay. My grandpa had passed away that year, and so maybe my dad's words were out of his own grief and his own inability to process his grief. But it also did not take into account that I had lost an 18-year-old friend, that the world had lost his humor, the world had lost his snark, and the world had lost his deep, deep love for his friends and his family, because Adam would do anything for anyone. Grief can take you a lot of places, and the ways that we carry grief are vastly different from one person to the next. We are each individually created and made, so our grief is never going to look the same. It's a part of life, just as love and faith and hope are a part of life. And I honestly think that God grieves too. I think he grieves hate. I think he grieves war. I think he grieves the bad things that do happen to us. Last week, Sean talked about this piece of community. And that was very true for me at the time because of the community where God had placed me at college with these people who had grown up in church. My grief brought me to my knees at the feet of Jesus. My grief could have taken me anywhere, especially with that massive side of depression. But my grief brought me to my knees at the feet of Jesus. Our passage from John 11 finds Mary falling at her knees at the feet of Jesus and telling him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." That part has always stuck out to me because Jesus knew. This whole chapter 11, I encourage you to go read it because the entire story of what is happening here is very interesting. Because Jesus knew what he was going to do. The sisters had sent him a message that had said, "Lord, whom you love is ill," expecting him to drop everything and come immediately and heal him. There's no doubt in my mind that's what the sisters thought that message was going to do, that Jesus would drop everything for Lazarus, that he would then run to their side and he would heal Lazarus. But Jesus, in that moment, instead knows that God's glory is going to shine in a completely different way. God's glory was going to shine through resurrection, not through healing. In verse 4, Jesus had replied with, "The sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." This foreshadowing of Jesus, who would eventually also be resurrected. Jesus took his time getting there. He knew how this was going to play out. It took him 4 days to get to them. And he tells his disciples in verse 15, "Lazarus has died, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe." That's a really hard statement to read, that somebody had to die in order for somebody else to believe. Can you hang with me for a second on that, though? That even when bad things happen, God can and will use them for good. It doesn't mean that God made the bad thing happen. It means that God will turn something to his good. But even knowing he was going to resurrect Lazarus, Jesus becomes overcome with emotion. In that moment with Mary and the Jews with her, twice in this chapter, it says Jesus was deeply moved. We read the stories in the Gospels to learn about Jesus, to learn about his characteristics, to learn about his emotions, to learn about his actions, the ways that he showed compassion to people, because we as followers of Jesus are supposed to be doing the same thing. And so even though we have Jesus in a moment where he knows what's happening, he knows what he's going to do, he's with Mary and feeling Mary's emotions. And Jesus wept. Was it shared grief with Mary? Maybe. Was it Jesus showing us that weeping is an integral part of being human? Maybe. Was Jesus a sympathetic crier? That would be nice. Jesus as a sympathetic crier. Was he forever giving us the green flag to weep? We have a tendency to hide tears. It happens very consistently in my family. But crying is healing. And instead of denying our grief or allowing ourselves to experience the pain, it is okay to feel and to weep. It is faithful and not something that needs to be hidden. It's okay to experience loss. We are going to experience loss in this world. And there's going to be a huge spectrum of how people feel that differently. From my stoic father to the one who cannot let it go, and everywhere in between. We are going to feel grief. It's also okay to let others help you carry it. I have a friend whose husband passed away a couple of years ago, and she has gotten into a grief share group. The resource page that we have from a couple of weeks ago, Grief Share, is actually on there, so you can still grab one of those this morning if you need to know the website and more information on that. But this group that she got into walked with her for an entire year. She says without that group, she doesn't know where she would be. She had a church, she had a Sunday school class, she had a discipleship group that she met with every week. She still needed the support group that could help her walk through those things. She also, in her discipleship group, had someone else who had lost a spouse, who had greatly benefited from the Stephen Ministries grief books. And so she started sending those to our friend who had recently lost her husband, passing that forward of something that had worked for her and trying to help. And those were the two things that she really lifted up to me as something that had helped her through the grief of losing her husband and a time frame she was not expecting. I share this for a couple of reasons, because while support groups are not for everyone, there are many times people would not be the same without them. And I think that we need to acknowledge that. I also share it because community is important. The people that surrounded her, the people that needed to be around her. Being in a space to not just learn to be more like Jesus, but being in a space with others to share stories, to talk about our life, to walk alongside each other. Trying to be more like Jesus grows roots into a group that are unlike anything I've ever seen before. And we start to look different. When we walk alongside each other, we start to look different. You're going to have more opportunities for that as we get to know each other better and as we have more groups that are here at Country Club. Because the reality is life is hard. And grief is actually not always related to death. Grief can be a medical diagnosis that is going to forever change your life. Losing a job, loss of a dream that you've carried for a lifetime, losing a beloved pet, a family experiencing divorce, the loss of a friendship, grieving a dream for your children to become something you've envisioned since they were little. We grieve the loss of the world as we know it. When we were deep in COVID, I had no idea I was grieving the loss of everything that was happening around us. We saw friends and families have weddings without everyone being able to attend. We saw birthdays through windows and life rhythms that drastically changed. There's deep grief in the life events that we missed. Yearning for something that we no longer have. That can be from the past, grieving what was and is no longer true. How many times have you said, if only it was like it used to be? Friends, that statement in and of itself is grief-filled. You're missing what was, and you want it back again. Grieving for your church family to be something. Just in the last couple of weeks, I found myself in conversations with people at other United Methodist churches that are grieving the loss of their church that had to close, or thinking that they're going to have to close. And that's just not affecting the people that sit in that room still, it's affecting the people that are legacy out of that place, that they will never be able to come back to that space and worship ever again. Maybe they live out of town, maybe they live on the other side of town, I don't know. But that is grief too. Grieving political choices that friends and family make in all facets of the political spectrum. I have a friend who's married to an immigrant, and it came out that her family did not support her immigrant family with their votes. And it has caused grief in her immediate family unlike I've ever seen someone have to go through. It is heartbreaking to watch her husband have to reconcile not being accepted by her family. Whatever form of grief you're experiencing, have experienced, or will experience, Jesus hears you, sees you, knows you. He's not going anywhere. That's the thing about Jesus, is that he doesn't go anywhere. He was there before you walked in, he's there with you, and he's going to be there long after you walk out. Constant presence. Grief is part of that faithfulness we hold as a follower of Jesus. Where there is deep love, friends, there's going to be grief. Because deep love impacts us on a level that we're not always prepared for. But Jesus stood in front of Mary while she's on her knees at his feet, empathy gripping him, bringing him to tears. Can you imagine Jesus weeping? Like, just for a minute. Like, Jesus weeping with Mary. What an insane human reaction for him to have. He could have easily just been like, oh, it's fine, Mary, it's going to be fine, just a minute, we're going to resurrect him. But no, he takes the moment. Jesus is present and takes the moment to feel with her, to allow her to feel. And then brings Lazarus back to life. If I'm Mary, my reaction is like, dude, why didn't you do that 20 minutes ago? But we cannot miss the fact that Jesus not only allowed her to feel, but gave her space to feel. That is what our Savior does. I felt darkness and grief. Not everybody feels that way. Grief can be a beautiful thing at times. But when you feel that darkness, it is suffocating. It was almost like I was in a room with no windows, not even a door that would have like a crack of light underneath it. No light. Couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. It was so dark. That is what the darkness felt like in me when Adam died. But then there's this pinprick of light that comes into that darkness. Because the light of Jesus is not always full-on sun. The light of Jesus is not always this candle that comes alive in front of you, or a light bulb that comes on. Sometimes the light of Jesus is that pinprick of light in the darkness that is everything, because that pinprick of light transforms that entire darkness. That is all Jesus needs. Jesus comes with an invitation for us to find that light in the darkness. It says in John 8:12, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness, because you will have the light that leads to life. For me, when I found the light in the darkness, it was a drastic change. Because I entered grief and depression as one person, and I came out the other side as a follower of Jesus. I was not a follower before that, and I honestly don't know that I would recommend becoming a follower of Jesus through grief and darkness, but it is how God shaped me. It had a lot to do with the people around me. Those college friends, oh my gosh, praying with me, reading the Bible with me, answering my incessant questions. If you've sat with me yet, you know that I ask a lot of questions because I'm a naturally curious person, but at the same time, I want to understand. I don't want to make assumptions. I want to understand. I want your perspective. I want to see what the full picture is. They were also staying up until 3 a.m. with me when I couldn't sleep. And when I could fall asleep, they were sleeping on my couch because I was waking up with nightmares. This insanely awesome community of people never left me alone. They would eat meals with me, and there was many empathetic tears that were cried, just as Jesus wept with Mary. They showed me how to knit my grief into my new belief. And they were able to move me into a full place of light. It became part of who I was becoming with Jesus. The Message translation has a beautiful, beautiful version of Matthew 5, verses 14 to 16. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors of the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a basket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. My community in college brought out the God colors of the world. They kept their house open all of the time with me and were so generous with their time. So what if we choose to be light bearers? What if we let Jesus shine through us? Will you open your door and be generous with your life? We've been using the par for the last several weeks, and so we're going to use that again today. With pray, I'm going to humbly suggest that you use the Message translation of Matthew 5:14-16. Pray that every morning this week and see what happens. And if your perspective on the day or your perspective on people might change a little bit. Act. Write a note of remembrance to someone you miss. It doesn't have to be someone who is no longer in this world with us. It could be someone that you just haven't seen in a while, or a friendship that went by the wayside decades ago that you still remember fondly. You don't have to send it if you don't want to. But writing those words out could be cathartic. Reflect on times you felt grief and what your experience was while grieving. Technically, I've already done this, so I'm not going to do this the coming week. However, in very unexpected ways, it has been a really good conversation that God and I have been having over the last couple of weeks. And that reflection over where we were and where we are and where God might have us be can be a really great reflection. Grief isn't just a season. It's part of this life we live with Jesus, because when we love deeply, we're going to grieve. Those two things seem to go hand in hand. But it can also become too much when we let our grief control us. My grief was controlling me, and I had people that helped pull me out of it. And a Jesus who was shining like a light on a hill, pulling me towards him. Jesus declared himself the light of the world. Light overcomes the darkness because the light wins in the end. Let's pray. God, that you would continue speaking to us, that you would show us where your light is, and that you would allow us to be light for you. God, that we would be your light bearers, that we would look different, that we would be magnetic because of how we look different, and people would want to know more about you. God, continue to draw us closer as a community in the conversations and the stories that we share with each other. And for the Jesus that feels so deeply alongside us. In his name, amen.